They define success by materialism and consumerism and prosperity, and all while completely ignoring the things that God cares about. They showed no concern for the orphan, the widow, the foreigner, those that God calls his people to care for. They valued sexual freedom over holiness. Their culture was saturated in sexual promiscuity. Sexual autonomy was held as sacred, that just pursue sexual expression however you want, and they mock God's design for sex and marriage. Babylon prioritized blending in over standing out. Go with the flow of the culture, buy into the worldview and philosophies of the day. Just blend in with those around you, because if you start to stand out, if you're that nail that sticks out, you might get hammered down. And they put comfort over conviction. Bow the knee to power and you will be left alone. Kiss the ring and you will be safe. If not, you might be thrown into a lion's den, you might be thrown into a furnace. Stand up for what you believe, and your reputation and safety are at risk. These were the defining characters of Babylon. And I imagine these characteristics felt very familiar to John in his day. And I imagine that we would say they feel kind of familiar to our day as well. And I think that's the point. I think what John is trying to do is show us that Babylon represents any system that elevates self, that opposes God, and seduces his people. You see, Babylon is not just a nation that once existed at some point in history. Babylon is the personification of systems and structures and governments and leaders and people who align themselves with the way of the dragon or Satan rather than the ways of God. Which is why in Revelation 18:4, God calls out, he pleads with his people, his church. He says, come out of her, my people. Come out of Babylon. And I don't think that he's just talking about a physical withdrawal, although there are some faith expressions that say we need to separate ourselves from Babylon as much as we possibly can so it doesn't have any influence on us. And there are other faith expressions that say, no, we just need to go right in with Babylon. We need to go along to get along. And I think what Jesus is calling his church to do is not to physically remove themselves, but to spiritually resist the Babylon around them. To spiritually resist its lure and compromise. These 7 churches, the 7 lampstands that Jesus walked amongst and knows them, he leaves them with a question: which will you choose? Will you choose Babylon? Will you choose the way that is moving away from God, or will you resist and stand firm? In Jesus' letters to these 7 churches, we see clues about how each one of them responded. And so there were 2 churches in particular that allowed their light to shine bright because they did not conform to the Babylon around them. Some of the lampstands were shining brightly. Smyrna is one of these churches. They were suffering for their faith in Christ, and yet they were enduring with faithfulness. Philadelphia, another church, was small, didn't have any power, and yet they were resisting with incredible strength. And their light and their lampstand was shining brightly. And Jesus said there were churches that were beginning to lose their light. Their light was growing dim. In Sardis, one of the harshest letters that Jesus writes, he has nothing good to say about this church. Instead, he says, you are spiritually dead. You look great on the outside, like you're doing all the right things, you're going through all of the motions. People look at you and like, man, something is happening there. And there's nothing happening in here. And Jesus called the Pharisees whitewashed tombs. You look great on the outside, but you're filled with death on the inside. That was Sardis. And their light was dim. They had no zeal for the Lord, no passion, no concern to bring others to know, love, and follow Jesus. Laodicea is another church whose light was dim. They had self-sufficiency. They put all of their faith and reliance on the things that they could do and produce. And it got to a point where they had little need for Jesus because they just were trusting in themselves. And then you have 4 churches whose light was kind of flickering. They couldn't decide what it was going to do. Is it going to be on or is it going to be off? And there were some things that when Jesus writes to these churches, he's like, I see what you're, like, there's some good stuff that is happening in you, but there's also this, like you're drifting. And so he writes to Ephesus, they had all truth but no love. They were confident in what they believed and they stood on truth, and yet they had no compassion, no grace, no love for others. They lacked humility. You had Pergamum that was holding on to faith, and they even had experienced some persecution, but it was beginning, that external pressure was starting to grow so much that they were beginning to compromise on the inside, and they were starting to blend in with the culture around them instead of standing on the truth of Christ. You have Thyatira. Thyatira was growing in works of service and love and devotion to the Lord and to one another, but they were beginning to make compromises and tolerating sexual immorality, and their light just flickered. Jesus is walking amongst these lampstands, these 7 churches, and some of them are shining brightly, some of them are dim, and some of them are flickering. Their light is almost out. He sees them, he knows them, he loves them. And to the ones who are dim or fading, Jesus does not abandon them. He does not cut them off. Instead, he says, here's what you can do. He rescues them, he brings them back home. He encourages and corrects them and shows them how to get back on course. And he sends these letters out, and each of the 7 letters ends in the same way. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. It is this plea from Jesus saying, are you listening? Are you paying attention? Don't just hear these words, but put them into practice. Let them guide you out of Babylon and back to me. And I think the question that Jesus is asking these 7 churches is the same question that he is asking us today. Are you listening?